The Articles of the Constitution, Article 3, the Judicial Branch. So, welcome back, everybody. And as we look at the Article 3, we're going to talk about the judicial branch today. The judicial branch is our nation's court system, and the highest court in our land is called the Supreme Court. Now, there's a Supreme Court in our state, and that's the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, but the highest court out of all the courts is the Supreme Court. And if you're looking at the picture here in front of you, that's John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court has the final say on all issues dealing with the Constitution. Whatever they say, whatever their interpretation is, that's the final straw. I want you to think of our court systems as a pyramid, and at the top you have the Supreme Court, and then of course as you get down to the wider base, then you have all the other types of courts that are associated with the courts, and that would be the district courts. And Pennsylvania is made up of three federal district courts, one state Supreme Court, a superior court, a Commonwealth court, and then, of course, trial courts for both general and limited jurisdiction. And if we take a look back at our Supreme Court, there are a total of nine justices, one Chief Justice, and that's John Roberts, and then eight Associate Justices. Now, the number nine was set back in 1869 through that Judiciary Act, then, right after the Civil War. And Franklin Roosevelt tried to, of course, court back by saying any judge that didn't retire at 70 be replaced with another judge until, of course, they either died or retired. And this, of course, goes against the principle of keeping justices or these associate justices in office for as long as need be. Of course, that's a tenured life position. Congress has the power to create and organize the lower federal courts. Today, there are lower federal courts in every state. A case is filed and tried in federal district courts and some specialty courts, such as admiralty and bankruptcy courts. The trial court looks at the facts of the case and decides guilt or innocent, or which side is right in an argument or dispute. The Court of Appeals hears appeals of the losing parties. The appellate courts look at whether the trial was fair, whether the process followed the rules, and whether the law was correctly applied. Now, to ensure that judges are insulated from any political influences, they are appointed for life as long as they're on good behavior. And basically, that means that they're in their job until they, of course, die, or if they get in trouble, they could be impeached. Now, the other thing here is the Judicial Compensation Clause, which means that Congress, even if they get angry at a judge or justice for what they do, they cannot change their pay, period. So you can't say, "Oh, we don't like what you're doing, so we're not going to pay you this week." No, you can't do that. Basically, once you're put in that position, you're supposed to be without any type of influence or biasness, and therefore they did put this in so that Congress couldn't touch those justices. The Judicial Power Clause basically states that the federal courts will decide arguments over how to interpret the Constitution, all laws that are passed by Congress, and our nation's rights and responsibilities in agreements with other nations. In addition, federal courts can hear disputes that may arise between states, between citizens of different states, and between states and the federal government. Now, if you remember last week, we did a case of Marbury versus Madison, and of course, this is where John Marshall came up with judicial review. And basically, the Supreme Court rules the interpretation of the Constitution, but there's no remedy for anything if there's no guilt. They're basically reading what the Constitution says and they're interpreting, which then goes back to the states. Almost all federal cases start in federal district courts, where motions are decided and trials are held. The cases are then heard on appeal by the Federal Court of Appeals and then by the Supreme Court if four justices of the nine-member court decide to hear that case. Congress can limit the power of the appeals courts by changing the rules about which cases can be appealed. State cases that involve an issue of federal law can also be heard by the Supreme Court after the highest court in their state rules or refuses to rule in their case. The Supreme Court pretty much only accepts few number of cases a year. When I say few, you're talking if there's 365 days, they may only hear about 80 cases, and usually those deliberations and decisions all come out in deliberations are in one day. Their rulings could take months to come out. In a small number of lawsuits, those involving ambassadors or public ministers and consuls, or where the state is a party, the Supreme Court is the first court to hear that case. Under the Criminal Trials Clause, the federal courts also have final say over guilt or innocence in federal criminal cases. A defendant in a criminal case, except impeachment, has a right to have his or her case heard by a jury in the state where the crime occurred. In cases of impeachment, that goes through the Senate. The original jurisdiction clause. Treason is the only crime specifically defined in the Constitution. And according to Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution, a person is guilty of treason if he or she goes to war against the United States or gives aid or comfort to an enemy. Now, the picture I have here is that of Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden was a CIA analyst who revealed top level secrets of the United States and how we spy on citizens of not only our country, but other countries as well. And if you're actively helping an enemy by passing along classified information, then that can lead to charges of treason. Now, Edward Snowden is no longer allowed to be in the United States because if he is, they would try him for treason. And in order to have treason, you must have two witnesses against you, or you have to confess in court. Edward Snowden is now a resident of Russia because of his actions. Russia has allowed him to stay there permanently. Um, if you are a vocal opposition to U.S. war through protest and demonstration, that's considered free speech. So that's not anything treasonous by any means. But Congress can set the punishment, but the punishment has to be related directly to the person and not their family. So, again, if I become treasonous against the United States, which I never would, but if I were, the United States, could never do anything against my four children or my wife. So that's it. That's a wrap. That's Article 3 of the Constitution. See you next time.